Welcome to Lead Your Life, the podcast for people who are seeking harmony in business and in life. My name is Debbie Heiser, and I'm an inner mastery and business mindset coach and the chief igniter here at The Lit Up Life. I feel an urgency to help people let go of past messaging so that they can make a lot of money doing what they love without sacrificing what they value most. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Straight from the corners of my mind is where I find my sanity.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lead Your Life with Debbie Heiser. I am Debbie Heiser. I help entrepreneurs make a lot of money doing what they love to do without sacrificing what's important to them. I feel like it's really critical for people to step into their favorite self, and we can't do that if we're locked in guilt and shame. And frankly, we can't make a lot of money if we're locked in guilt and shame because we push it away. So with that, though, I know I say I'm excited every time I have a new guest, but I am like giddy this morning to have my good friend Ammi Midstokke on this episode. And part of why Ammi and I met years ago. Actually, I don't know if you remember this, but my good friend Barb Perouse had a little retreat up on the Schweitzer Mountain. And when I moved here, my eating habits changed because I was introduced to Juanita's crack chips, is what I call them, which today it just disgusts me because they're so oily. But I was introduced to those. And this is a wine drinking town. And so all of a sudden I was having digestive issues. Amy's at this retreat helping us prepare this beautiful meal. She asked us to take a walnut, and I can't remember if it was like 30 or 50 times. It felt like 8 minutes that we were chewing this walnut, but like having all the different flavors, like that was a really pivotal thing for me. I don't know if I've ever shared that with you. And so from that moment on, I called her and became a client of hers because she is a nutritional therapist and had done that for many years. And we become friends throughout the time. Then we worked together, all sorts of fun stuff. And why I really wanted to have you on today, Ammi, is when I think about risk taking, when I think about leading a life that you are co-creating, like you come to mind, right? Like you definitely look at things that I'm co-creating this, with the universe. Like I am going forward and I'm leading it all out. Like I don't know too many people that learn how to put siding up and that learn how to like make shelves, which I can't wait for you to come to my house and do. But like I'm just inspired by you, and I would love my guests to know more about you too. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself professionally, because I feel like you'll do a much better job of that. And then we're going to talk about all things Ammi.
Okay. Wow. I should probably prelude this with like the reality that I'm a Gemini. So I have about, like I'm a Gemini cat or something. Like I have 9 lives. And so when people ask me to introduce myself, I don't ever know which part, like what do I come in with? My formal training was in business. So I have a master's in business, which really came in handy when I got my second bit of formal training as a nutritional therapist that you alluded to, which is how I come to the point that we never tell people that we became friends that way, because then all my people would want to be friends. And remember
Good point.
About that, because I spent a decade being like, I can serve you, but we can't be friends.
You know what though, Ammi? The truth be told, we weren't friends until after it was about a year after I was a client of yours. You're right.
And that became my mantra, and I think that's the same ethical boundary that a lot of therapists have, is that it's 2 years between treatment and being able to be friends with someone. Yeah. And that usually dodges quite a few bullets.
Yeah.
So to say.
That's good.
So, of course, I've always been a writer, and now I write solely as my profession. Mine is a couple of special therapeutic interventions that I do, but mostly I just write and adventure and learn how to do siding, so I can have a house with siding on it that isn't Tyvek. Yeah. So that's me. Yeah, I'm a mom and an outdoors woman and a wife, and I like bikes a lot, which is evident in my background decor today.
Yeah, you are a diverse woman, and one of the things that I'm just going to bring up right away, because I don't know if you know this, but I use you as an example a lot around, when it comes to stepping into doing what you love, right? Like you've been working on a book for quite some time. And I don't mean that like it's been like this super long thing, but this one is like personal and in your heart. And in the meantime, you write for a lot of different publications. And
Mm.
he writes for the Spokesman Review, or I think you still do, don't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
every week. Yeah, I'm a
Yeah.
columnist.
And yeah. And so this column, and didn't they like, correct me if I'm wrong here, which I know you will, because that's part of what I love about you, is that they asked you to put together a book.
It's a little bit different. The
Okay, tell us about
I
that.
have written for the Spokesman for about a decade now as a columnist. They did approach me to become a columnist. They had read some of my stuff in another magazine. I was briefly famous for that mountaineering accident in which I was helicoptered off the hill. And every year I count my toes and my blessings for that. Um, and then I was approached by two different organizations about being published, which is also a bit of a unicorn
Yeah.
in the writing world. And they asked me, did I have a book in mind? And I said, actually, I have been in my head thinking about something that's much less like the column, which is, I would say I dive into meaningful topics, but it's relatively docile because anybody opening a newspaper, a daily newspaper, you know, they're only prepared for so much.
Yeah.
And so I had some more meteor matter from my childhood and my life experiences that I wanted to write about. And I pitched it to both of them, and one of them was really excited about it. And so I'm actually working on that book. And at the same time, they asked me if we could publish a collection of essays from the Spokesman that would turn into the book All the Things, which we worked on. Bye-bye.
For those of you on YouTube, you can see that I'm holding up the book. Go to all sorts of places in the show notes that you can buy this book, and I highly recommend it. Go ahead.
Um,
Brief
everybody
advertisement.
tells me that it's like the best bathroom reading because every essay is about the length of a good bowel movement.
I can see that. That's what I love about it, because I can pick it up and I laugh. It like touches all the feels,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I just love that.
Yeah. It's definitely a journey of like gardening misery and loss and love. And there's romance in it. And, it's just very much life, right? It's all the things.
Yeah.
It's all the
And
things.
it's all sorts of humor too. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
God, if we didn't have humor, I don't know how we manage in this life. So I think that is a very long answer to your question. Like how did I get there?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so now I'm working on another book for the same publisher.
Oh, good. Good,
Yeah.
good. So I'm so in love with this like writing career that you have. And I want to tell on you too, because it's just, to me, it's an example of when you're doing what you're made to do,
Mm,
things, like the flow does happen, and you're really good about keeping the monkey brain, or trying to keep the monkey brain at bay, right? Um, Not that you don't feel the feels, you feel through them, but like you kind of are like, I'm not available for that. And I remember you reaching out and saying, hey, we're going to do my book launch. It's going to be at this particular building, the Spokesman Review building in this area. And then you're like texting me, holy shit, like it's sold out, and you sold out the Bing Theater in Spokane, right? And being there in the energy of the people that just adore, like the messages that you have touch people's hearts. And to me, that's just such a profound thing, and something that says a lot about who you are and how you write.
mm. You know, I think that's the part about being a storyteller that has come to me and been true, like my truth in my whole life. I think I've always known it. I've always written. I have diaries from when I was 9. They are
Yeah.
horrific. Lots of poetry about my horse.
Yeah.
And I think that what resonates with people is both my vulnerability and obviously the self-deprecation,
Mhm.
but my willingness to talk about things that do happen to all of us. And the best part of that really is when I get letters back, when people write me fan mail, and like literally every week I get letters. If I don't get a letter, I don't write a story like that again. And so,
That's a good litmus test.
so um, what the best part is that when people write, they don't say like, "Oh, that was so great." Some blessed people do. What they do is they tell me their story.
Yeah.
And what I've learned through that is that through telling our stories and being open and transparent and vulnerable about our struggles, whether it's from the varmint that are eating our garden to the silly things we fight with our husbands about, to raising our teenagers, to weight, to being a woman, to the horrors of perimenopause and menopause, like all of these things, they other people experience them. And so I believe very strongly in communicating and community through storytelling. And I think that that's where that beautiful following comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's awesome. So I just want to celebrate that for you. And I want to ask, and I didn't ask this before we hopped on, so you are welcome to say no, but can you tell us a little bit? You talk about it in the beginning of this book, but can you tell us a little bit about, because you alluded to it, your incident on the mountain?
Oh, yeah. That that's a that's a common story. The I was hiking with a friend. Actually, we were climbing. We climbed as in with ropes and gear to the top of Chimney Rock, which is a really famous place out here, especially for climbers. You can only ascend it by using ropes and anchors. And so we climbed, we had a small picnic, and we were on our way back out. And part of that mountain fell down several years ago. And so the scree is loose still and not stable. And although we know the risks of that, we had discussed the risks on our way up. People walk across it all the time. You just are careful and mindful of how you navigate it. But it is always dangerous. And in a moment of conversation, I stepped on something so huge I didn't think it could move, and much to my surprise, it moved.
Yeah.
And so, in a rumble tumble, I got pinned beneath the boulder, crushed my right foot, and left some holes in my legs and stuff. And stayed there for about 9 hours until rescue could come, and then they were able to lift the rock. The real concern was that the way I was pinned, it was pretty likely that my whole ankle and maybe more would be crushed in the removal of the rock. Like there was
Oh,
no
gotcha.
way to get it off without grinding my poor limb. But they created a really neat harness out of webbing and were able to like pull it off and not cause more damage. And then, but I was on this like treacherous slope that's now has 8 or 9 rescuers on it, that's unsafe for them, and bless them, they all took such risk in getting me out of there safely. And then I was helicoptered out at sunrise, and I drank a lot of bone broth and basically grew a new foot, and everything works.
Yeah, that's so awesome. And you got Freya out of the deal too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she came in a couple years later and definitely has been a wonderful sidekick in the mountains now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. Amy,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that, because, I can only imagine like what went through your mind, but taking then that misadventure, right? You call it mountain misadventures. And you kind of crack me up, because I've heard you speak before and you talk about how like you'll call people and ask them to go on these crazy adventures. And you're kind of like, I'm really, really good until not, right? Like, there's always going to be a misadventure that happens on these adventures. And I love that about you too, because you're so real to say, yeah, things could go wrong, and they probably will. So
Yeah. And
time.
being prepared for the things that go wrong, I think, is the key. And it's so transferable to what we do in life. It's like okay, so you go out in the woods and you take risk, right? You talked about risk earlier, and we need to understand what some of those risks could be and have a mitigation plan. And then also choose, like, are we prepared for this risk or not prepared for this risk, which then exponentially increases the risk if you're not prepared. And in life, we do that as individuals. And then when we're in partnership with people, for example, going out into the back country, I talk a lot about my friend Shannon, who I can go anywhere with in the back country. And I know that she's super capable of assessing risk for herself and communicating that risk for us as a partner. And the same in that incident, we were prepared for that sort of an accident. We were able to stay warm and fed. We knew how to handle the search and rescue situation. I was actually out with somebody who trains people in wilderness medicine. So that was fantastic. You couldn't pick a better partner that day.
Yeah. Well, and I think to me, as you talk about that with life, that is so true in the fact also a big piece of what I see in you. And I think a lot of it comes from the planning, and you can't plan for everything, but like you do the pre-thought and the pre-plan around it, which then builds confidence, right? It builds confidence in yourself. Just like you said, you're confident in Shannon, knowing that she can assess for herself, do the things, where if you were out with me, because I don't have that experience, that's a completely different situation, right? And so when I think about that, you also then have the confidence in yourself to know that you're thinking about those things, that you're well versed enough to know to look out for certain things. And like, I think there's a big piece in that too.
Yes, and what you say reminds me of something I said to my husband when we were talking about siding. And I said, I do not know everything, but I believe I can learn anything.
Yeah.
And I think that that's where the confidence has to come in, and also this self-trust. So like when you just said, I mean, it would be very different if you went into the woods with me. I would argue, actually, not so much. There are ways in which I trust you to communicate what your limitations are. I trust you to tell me when you're reaching them.
Right.
So I trust myself to be able to take care of you, to tell you what needs to be known about me in that situation, to make sure that we're safe. And so I think that it really comes back down to like communication and trust, both of yourself and your abilities, and also of those that you're spending your time with or doing things with, whether it's a business interaction or a camping trip gone awry.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Amy. Thank you for that, because you're right. That trust and that confidence, it may just look different, and there's different levels of what people's knowledge are, and that's so true of life, right? So let me ask you too, because shifting from a very successful nutritional therapy practice into writing full time, like, what's your why behind this? Why move in that direction to write full time? What's important to you about what you do?
Oh, it's my heart. I think I said this maybe at that writing retreat that you came to a few weeks ago, where I was reading recently this book about owls that was really, about owls and the people who watch owls, who are an odd folk because they stay up all night to count birds. As if bird watchers, like there's bird watchers, which are in their own group of sort of, it's the best in the binoculars. Yeah. But then people who watch owls who stay up all night to bird watch, they're a category of their own. And so this one guy out of Montana, a researcher out of Montana, was talking to somebody about why he does this. And he said, I think there are two important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you discover why.
Oh, that's good.
Isn't that a nugget?
Yeah.
Yeah, just this one little line, probably the only thing I'm going to remember out of that book, except for that the horns on great horned owls are not ears. They're just feathers.
Oh, that's good to know. That's good to know. And you know what, Amy, we're going to take a quick break. And then when we come back, I want to know more about this experience with your owl book. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Let's face it, sometimes as an entrepreneur and a business leader, we need some guidance, support, and community. So we here at The Lit Up Life have 3 ways that you can work with us in order to achieve that. As a private client, we work together to quantum leap your business by discovering strategies to help you move past what's holding you back and allow you to identify what you want your life to look like. The result? Your business becomes the conduit to the lifestyle, success, and impact that you intend. Now, I'm a huge believer in the power of collaboration. So in our community masterminds, you can join in with other high vibrational business owners who want to level up, increase impact, and financial gain, all with a tribe of other women to support and encourage you on your journey. Currently, we're accepting application for this women's mastermind group, which is a year-long program for women in business who are ready for that next level of success. We create deep personal awareness in a safe and supportive space where you can experience growth with others who are on that same path. Through weekly sessions with our program coaches, teachings that go beyond the buzzwords, and immersive retreats in places like Mexico, the Dominican Republic, or Belize, we work together to create long-term abundance and lasting impact in your life and business. The last and final way to get involved with us is our group coaching programs. They provide the opportunity for teaching, masterminding, and feeling like you aren't alone on this ride. Come join us. Okay, we are back. So Ammi, you were telling us the horned owl, those aren't really ears, they're just feathers, and that bird watchers, and then there's owl watchers, and this book, and I love that quote.
And
say it again.
purpose. Yeah, right. The quote, there are two important days in your life: the day you were born and the day you discover why.
Yeah, I just, ooh,
Ah,
that's a
it's
goosebumper.
just one of those like delicious things that you keep wanting to hold on to. So I always knew I was a writer. I wrote as a little girl. The neighbors would give me old typewriters and ribbon. I wrote journals. I've always kept journals. They are my 20s, salacious details. That was my decade of cocaine and married men, I like to say. And followed, not surprisingly, by my decade of therapy. So I've always written. That has been the true part of me. And I've always been called to serve, maybe less so in my corporate life, which is probably why I left it so early. Was like, wait a second, I'm helping shareholders, but not really the general population. And so being a nutritionist was really special, and I specialized in trauma and like real life stuff. As you know, it wasn't like, oh, this is the kind of salad you should eat. It was like, so why are we eating pizza every day, and why don't we actually know what a walnut tastes like, because we haven't taken time to enjoy it or explore it. And so that part of balancing my life between being a nutritionist and a writer began to tip, and I was struggling with, how do I want to reach more. I want to reach more people, and I want to do what's true for my heart. Specializing in trauma is also exhausting. Your heart goes so much into people, and I am a very empathetic person, as many women are, and certainly many people who grew up with a childhood like mine. We feel the feels.
Yeah.
And so there was a time where it was like, I'm feeling a lot, and I need more balance in my life. And so that ultimately came to this decision that it was time to leap. It was just time to leap. And so I did.
I love that.
And
Yeah.
I have not, I mean, it was terrifying. And I had a few nights where I was like, oh, what am I not gonna make enough money? But I've never, if that's just never been, I grew up so poor. I was like, money, somehow it happens. You say you need the money, and the money appears. You got to work more, you write more, you do whatever, you hustle. And so that was less of my fear. It was interesting watching like how our identity is attached to so much, where it's like, if I'm not a nutritionist and I'm not saving people with vegetables, then who am I even? And I think that's true, especially for men, but also for women who have careers or jobs or a particular role that they're filling, and they want to leave that, or they have this other truth that they want to pursue, but they're so attached to this identity piece. And I didn't linger long on that, girl.
Yeah, I know. I loved it. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that you say that. I was talking to somebody else about this too, about how particularly we in the Western world associate a lot of our identity to what we do in a profession, right? And so it is kind of that untangling. And when you really, when you get down to the bare of it, who we are, the essence of who we are is love, right? Like just showing up in love. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but I know for me, when I show up in an attitude where I'm in gratitude, I'm like thankfulness, and I'm just showing up in love and looking at the gain and the possibility of things, it is very different than when I show up not in that state.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
And putting my identity to all of these things, or even searching for externally something that I'm responsible for myself, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I see you write about that in the way that you do. It's just not like in those like exact words. But so tell me, as you have gone into this, you've done some fun things. Like I'll share, I have posted about this, going to an improv and creative writing weekend that Ammi helped host, and really tapped in some creativity with me. And I walked away from that. I'd always thought, oh, I'm not a writer. I can write academic things, but I'm not a writer. And I walked away from that realizing that I may be a baby chick on it, but I do have a lot of creativity inside me, and that was tapped that weekend. So thank you for that. But where do you, because I think there were some profound things that happened to you that weekend too, and when you've done creative writing classes like this. So what does that do for you?
Mm, mm. The I don't want to divulge too much about the what happens in the retreat, right? What happens in the writing classes stays in the writing classes, but I'm going to talk about you because you're right here.
Okay.
So
I would expect nothing less.
so I do not see this statement that you're not a creative person as aligning with any way in which you manifest your life, your business, your practice with people and clients, or how you create your work. And so I don't know if that's this idea that when people think of the word creative, they think of like fiction and lots of adjectives, or painting that is beautiful or pleasing to the eye. I was just in DC and I went to an exhibition of German artists who specialized in anxiety.
Oh, wow.
And all the pictures, I knew
Interesting.
better than the Germans, right?
Yeah.
So, but it was so creative, so creative. Was it beautiful in the sense that we kind of try to tag things with beauty? Not necessarily. Would we look at it and say creative? Um, I think maybe in the definition that we're trying to put upon ourselves, maybe
Yeah.
not. And so when I heard what you wrote,
Mhm.
not only was it creative, it was like, what is creativity more than the depth and the like unfurling of ourselves in all our breadth and wonder? And some of it's very dark and some of it's very luminescent. And so I think that when people are like, oh, when you say I'm just a baby chick, I would argue, oh no, you are not a baby chick, because I know you to be a deep feeler and a deep thinker. Um, Whether or not you put those things down in a format that you would consider creative writing, just like you said earlier, like, oh, I haven't been writing. Well, I haven't been creative writing. And I'm like, what's the bloody difference, girl?
Yeah. Yeah.
You're creating. Every sentence was created.
Yeah.
And so I want to encourage everybody who's listening or watching to recognize that that part of them is creative. Cooking is creative.
Yeah.
You know, you could argue if you fold your towels and they're not tri-folded, which is a sin, of course, that's creative.
I don't trifle.
Oh, I knew you weren't perfect, but I wasn't sure which way.
Well, and Amy, you know what? You bring up a good point, because the message that I have been told and heard from people is that I wasn't a very good storyteller, right? And so to the point of what I do about helping unwind things, and that's where I say to people, step into things that don't feel as comfortable to you, because in that you figure out, just like I say, everything in life is a sales call. What I hear you saying is everything in life is creative.
Mm-hmm.
It
And a
just may not
story.
fit into the box of what society tells us is a story or what is creative, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what a beautiful analogy there with that, because yeah, and as I look at writing content, that is writing, and it is creative, because I'm trying to get a point across of like some of these nebulous things that are out there in theory that don't make a lot of sense unless you put it into more of today's vernacular. So
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Which also takes a lot of creativity, right? You have to, I call that thinking inside the box.
Yeah.
we need to think inside the box sometimes, and that requires some of the most creative ways of using our brain, is to like take these limitations and still create something wonderful, or take this, like you use the word vernacular, and be like, okay, how do I take this out of the box thought and put it into this to inspire other people to work within these bounds that are, for better or worse, existing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to also talk a little bit. Well, there's two things I want to touch on before we end here. And one of them is being a mom of a teenager, right?
Mm,
Like, and I think you do such a beautiful job of letting your teenager be who they are,
mhm,
and being kind of a Yoda with that,
mhm.
with her, and or with B. Tell me about her, him. I'm gonna because I've known her as B.
Right,
But
right.
her.
B, Ben, it goes by he, him, and I am the
Okay, thank
proud
you.
owner of a 2007 model trans queer teen.
Perfect.
And so that, and I speak about it publicly because it's been quite the adventure,
Yeah.
both in keeping me legitimate as a progressive, although I am a registered Republican in our state because it's the only way you can vote. Um, and so, is this like confession hour? No.
Right. It's the only way you can go to the voting polls and have a vote in Idaho, right?
Yes.
Like to choose whatever you want to choose. I think that's important.
And yeah, and so it's been a remarkable journey, and but not the one, I spoke about it at a storytelling event in Spokane a few weeks ago. I'll send you guys the link because it's on YouTube, where I talk about my kid joining the patriarchy from the backseat of my Subaru. And it's not this like, oh, I lost a daughter, but I gained a son kind of fairy tale. It's like, I, going back to identity, I was questioning my identity. Like, was I a bad example of womanhood? Did I did I
Yeah.
talk too much about my weight and my body image and the evils of the patriarchy, that my kid just defected to the other side? Like, and so I had all this wrestling and this emotion and loss and grief and complex things, that I had just not really prepared for, and that are not talked about. So when
Yeah.
we talk about the trans movement, I don't even know if we want to call it a movement, but it is a reality. It is a reality. So there are transgendered people, and gender is coming into great question and metamorphosis right now, which I am super fascinated by. And it's right here in my kitchen. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to have such an intelligent and emotionally articulate child who can communicate that and share the journey with us. Teenagers, I've heard for years the horrors of teenagers, and my experience has been very different. Well, of course, we're stewarding these young humans, and like holding these guardrails and being like, okay, good luck, and hoping they survive, and that we don't, mess them up too much. But what people failed to tell me is that we are bearing witness to the unfolding of the future right in front of us, and watching that and being like, wow, it's so hopeful. It gives me so much hope. Just as much as people are like, oh my God, so much social media, these kids, all they do is watch screens. They're so privileged. Yeah, 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 yeah. They are being misunderstood and greatly underestimated.
Yeah, Amy, I love the way you say that, because I worked a lot with high school students in my past, and I've always said they're the like underknown generation, no matter which generation you're in.
Mhm.
Like I've never had, well, I don't want to say never. I have really deep conversations with you, but like the depth of conversations that these high school students have, and like the thoughts that I mean, it is, yeah, it's profound, and what a beautiful story. I love that. So thank you, because I didn't realize that it was Ben. So I'm going to write that down so I don't forget. Now, part of that too, and I love the vulnerability that you had around being a parent, and the thought processes that you had. And I know a big piece of why you do what you do and have done in your past is around women and mental health. So tell me a little bit about that passion, what drives you in that, and then we'll close up.
Mm, mm. The Well, recently, I had a friend disappear in a real sad incident of underdiagnosed and misdiagnosed mental health, and she is still missing and probably will not resurface. The and it brought to light something that I see in my clinic all the time when when I was running the clinic, were these women who were so high functioning and doing amazing things. And they were raising their children and caring for their parents and running their careers, and often had illness on the side of that. If not autoimmune disease, then symptoms of GI disorder. They had adrenal fatigue. They had really exacerbated symptoms of perimenopause and menopause because they were carrying this burden that was left literally to their physiology to manage at that point. And and so with this loss of my friend, I really was, it just came so close to me, this reality that we are not communicating enough about this. We are hiding our illness out of shame and guilt. Nobody in her life understood what was happening. Nobody knew her diagnosis. Nobody knew the kinds of medications she was taking. Her husband had some information, but wasn't trained in and had not been exposed to. So, and he said something really profound to me. I interviewed him recently, and this story will come out in a few weeks. I'm writing about it. That he said, "Oh, he's like, she wasn't such a secret keeper. She just didn't want to make everything about her. She wanted life to be about the children and the good things. And meanwhile, she was very mentally ill and aware to some extent. The kind she had would definitely, she was lucid and aware enough to know that she was losing her mind, but could not share out of shame, guilt, and protection of others. And I think whether some of us go to those extremes or not, many of us know it, and we treat it with alcohol, we treat it with food, we treat it with dissociation, we treat it with shopping, Debbie, you and I both. um, and then we have guilt and shame about those things, and
Yeah.
that compounds it as well. And so I really feel drawn to having the conversations about the things that impact us. Like a couple of years ago when I miscarried, and I wrote about it very graphically, and the rawness of that experience, and the amount of women and men who wrote to say, we don't talk about this enough, and how sad this tragedy is, how it impacts our mental health for years to come, was kind of a turning point. I've always written somewhat about, even though sometimes shaded, about mental health, because I live with PTSD, and I am not necessarily an advocate for any particular thing as much as I'm an advocate for people sharing
Yeah.
and being supportive of each other through that sharing.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, Amy, but I have found in my life that by not sharing, it is almost like holding on to a secret, right? And it
Mhm.
starts to dig at you and it rubs, and then it just it sucks the energy out of you. And even subconsciously, because many times, like I know I resonated when you said protector, right? Like we tend to go into that mama bear protection mode even with things. And yeah, I think this is a conversation that needs to continue, as far as mental health in general. And I find too, I don't know if you went to it, I was out of town. And for those of you listening that were local, some of you might have gone. There was a movie recently at the Canada about mountain towns, even, and
Mhm.
mental health, and how there are certain areas, and I know even industries that have higher suicide rates, have higher mental illness rates. And I don't know. I think it is something that needs to be continued to being brought forward. And I think the more and more people talk about it, the more and more people like yourself say, hey, it's okay to talk about this stuff, and we need to talk about this because it's healthy.
Mhm.
Then I think the more and more impact that will have. So thank you for having those tough conversations. That's part of why I love you.
You're welcome. I will keep having them.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And so I almost feel like this could be another podcast too. So we might have to have you on later this year to go further into all of these wonderful like things about being a mother. And because I always say too, it's being a mother from the moment my child left my body is a lesson in letting go
Mm.
and how that works, and even how we mentally do that as women. And so anyway, I see another potential podcast. But before we leave, I want to again say go out and get All the Things by Ammi Midstokke. It's AMMI. We'll have all that in the show notes. And Ammi, I want to ask two kind of final questions. One is, I know you keep your book list. What's one of the most profound or best books you read in the last year?
Okay. I love this question because I love reading. Obviously, the book that most, well, two books. One of them I consumed in a day was Joan Didion's "Slouching Towards Bethlehem," which is a collection of essays. She was a profound journalist in the '60s and continued to write fiction and nonfiction throughout her life. And seldom have I read such an artful weaving of storytelling. And then a book that really touched me, I had a lot of loss last year, so that could be part of it, was Lincoln in the Bardo. And Lincoln in the Bardo is, the Bardo in Buddhist religion, for example, is kind of like purgatory. It's where the souls are hanging out and they haven't figured out, they've unfinished business. And Lincoln's son passed away. And he, legend has it that he went to his grave often. He was in a, what do you call it, a sarcophagus? Is that what it is? Where the body's like in a coffin that you can still access. And so he went and fetched his son often and held him after he passed away. And so it's telling the story of these two souls that are still trying to connect, even though one's already gone. And it was so beautiful. Speaking of letting go, it really touched me, Lincoln and the Bardo, and is a remarkable historical piece too. Yeah, that definitely is a read that everyone should do.
Okay, perfect. And then if we were to go out to whatever platform you use to stream music, what song is your most played song?
Oh man, I wish I could Google it now. But okay, I mentioned that I'm loving Nako Bear's new one called Enough. But honestly, I'm training for a bike race right now, so I think I have Dropkick Murphys. Going back to Boston, or it's some like heavy hill song, and it comes on, and every time, even if it's like just on a regular playlist, I suddenly feel like I'm cleaning house really hard and fast, you know.
I understand that. I like a lot of Breaking Benjamin when I'm working out, or some old music, right? But yes, I understand. Awesome. Well, Ammi, we've mentioned a couple times, so I'm not going to ask you that. We've got things in the show notes. Check out the links, go out and get her book, look for events if you're in the Pacific Northwest, and go see Ammi wherever she is doing a reading or speaking. You will not be disappointed in any way, shape, or form. And so with that, folks, it's a wrap. Ammi, thank you so much for being on. So appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah. And with that, folks, we'll see you next week. Have a great one. That's a wrap for this conversation. I'm so glad you've joined us. Remember to subscribe to the podcast so you can catch all of our future episodes, and visit us at thelituplife.com for details on how you can become part of the Lit Up Life community. A quick shout out to my friend Jackie Wilson and her friends, the creators of our amazing theme music. Thanks so much for allowing us to share this perfect song with our listeners. Looking forward to having you listen in to our next episode.